Hi, it's Dwyer. It's November 11th, 2024. Very important to make a note of the date, right? It's November 11th, 2024. We're into the month of November. You still have a month and a half left for the season. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now let's talk about 5 things we've learned from this past week in the NFL with an eye on what's going to happen, with an eye on futures. First, it is all over for the New York Jets. The Jets had a slim opportunity to make the playoffs if they could run the table. Instead, Aaron Rodgers goes out, throws for 151 yards. The team is beaten badly by Arizona, a beatable team. You hope the team who fired its head coach Saleh is out interviewing coaches. There has to be a reason for them to self-emulate during the season and fire their head coach. You hope they're out interviewing coaches. Here's the problem. Aaron Rodgers, and let's be blunt here, I'm a guy who believes that talent matters. Rodgers is one of the most talented quarterbacks I've ever seen. He's on my very short list of the best quarterbacks I've seen, right? But the concern is that Rodgers is going to want control over the offense. That's going to scare away the future Andy Reids of the world. Offensive gurus who want to make their imprint, who don't want to hear about the plans of the quarterback who seems to have the owner's ear. Didn't they talk the night before Saleh was fired? Aren't a couple of his buddies on the team right now? Right? Devontae Adams wanted out of Las Vegas. Not surprisingly, he ends up on the Jets, right? Some teams would view Adams as someone who could be a malcontent, who was leaving a team that needs him, right? That's not the case with the Jets. He had a buddy at quarterback. If you're a future Andy Reid and you're looking at the Jet job, you're thinking to yourself, wow, do I want to deal with this dynamic? What's going to happen if I say, hey, Aaron, on offense, here are the ideas that I want to put in place, and Aaron says no? Are there going to be phone calls? Am I going to be reprimanded by team ownership? Am I going to keep my job if I run afoul of Aaron Rodgers? Folks, these are the kind of questions that scare away good candidates. You could be an offensive guru. You could say, oh, I could do a lot with this receiving core. Wow, Breece Hall, my goodness. I could do some things with this running back situation. You look at the division, you're like, wow, I'll take my chances with New England and Miami. I'll agree, Buffalo is a tough out. But if I'm in the top 2 of the division out the gate, I'll take my chances. But you're not going to take your chances when a quarterback wields this much power. Folks, it's a problem. We'll see how the Jets solve it. The second point that I learned this weekend concerns the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I want to be open here about my past betting patterns. Pat Mahomes has proven me wrong in the postseason time and time again. Last year, I firmly believed that the San Francisco 49ers, who did have a lead in OT, but I firmly believe that they were the best team in the National Football League, as I believe now, by the way. Right? Pat Mahomes came out, Needed 3 in overtime to keep the game going. Of course, this is Pat Mahomes. He got 6. Another title for Kansas City. Let me say, too, in an earlier Super Bowl, Pat Mahomes was injured. I thought the Chiefs were a little bit suspect even before the injury. Pat Mahomes was limping around. I had the Philadelphia Eagles. Worse yet, I had a double-digit lead in the second half of that Super Bowl. Pat Mahomes came back, one of the best Super Bowl performances I've seen, wins the Super Bowl for Kansas City. Let's just say I recognize Pat Mahomes is a rare talent. Pat Mahomes, if he takes off the shoulder pads today, is a first ballot Hall of Famer, right? 3-time Super Bowl MVP, and he's a young guy still. Right, so understand, I've been wrong about Pat Mahomes in the postseason especially. I don't want to cover that up here. But, even as the last unbeaten team this season, Kansas City simply does not look real to me. Right, folks, this is the softest team I've seen that's been unbeaten this late in the season. Right, let me point out that I know there are a lot of Chief fans out there. Let's face it, you're ruling the roost right now. You're going for a three-peat. Feel free to leave your views in the comment section of this video. But let me point out, against the Broncos, a team that did not make the playoffs last year, that's operating with a rookie quarterback. Let me just point out, defensive coordinator Vance Joseph is likely your defensive coordinator of the year. Right? But yesterday, Kansas City, against a team in their division that they should know, only scored 16 points. 16. Right? Understand, when you saw Pat Mahomes running on the field at the end of the game as if he just won a Super Bowl, understand, no, they'd just beaten a divisional opponent. They'd just beaten a divisional opponent who didn't make the playoffs last year. Has it come to this? It wasn't like Pat was running on the field after beating the 49ers or after beating the Detroit Lions or after beating the Bills or the Ravens. No, he was running on the field after beating the Broncos. That's how thin this Kansas City team is. KC, yesterday, no touchdowns in the second half. Right? If you're of the mindset that Kansas City's offense is elite, folks, your playbook is dated. Kansas City's getting by because of Chris Jones and this defensive unit. Let me make another point, too, because the box score is truly horrifying. Kansas City's total net yards yesterday, again, versus a team that did not make the playoffs last year. KC's total net yards, 300. Folks, I'm not talking about passing yards. I'm talking about their total yards against the Broncos yesterday, 300. Now, as Mahomes threw for 266 yards, just understand the Chiefs had no rushing attack to speak of. None. The idea of averaging 4.5 yards per carry is foreign here to this team. Now I understand. People are going to say, hey, running backs are hurt. We're dealing with Kareem Hunt, a midseason pickup. When our guys come back, we'll be fine. Right, folks? That sounds too iffy to me. Now, the team in the AFC, which I consider to be wide open, even with the defending champions being unbeaten in almost mid-November. The team in the AFC with the best situation, and you need to have futures action on them, are the Buffalo Bills. Folks, they are real. Right? If you don't know that by now, Understand, you're going to know that next week because they host Kansas City. Right, folks? I know there's a special relationship between the Bills and the Chiefs. I understand there's been heartache. There's last-second touchdowns in playoff games. The Bills hosting the Chiefs last year and losing a game that everyone in upstate New York thought was winnable. I get it. But these Chiefs are going to be unrecognizable to the Bills. The Bills are going to show up and they're going to think, oh, wow, this offense is going to be tough. This offense is going to have us on the ropes. Then they're going to find out that there's no there there. Right? Understand how good the Bills have it. They have 5. Just hold up your own hand and look at it. They have 5 more wins than the second place team in their division. Right? With only 2 losses, they will pull to within 1 game of Kansas City if they win next week. In other words, folks, the Bills are still in contention to have home field in the AFC. We've been focusing on teams like the Ravens, right? Ravens have a great offense. The Ravens have more losses than the Bills right now. We've been focusing on teams like that, teams like KC in the AFC. Right? This team is in the best position. The Bills. Let me also point out, too, that there is going to be a moment of truth. Not just for them, but for the team they're playing. After they play KC, and yes, I'm taking the Bills to beat KC next week, the Bills have a bye week. They get to stay home because the week following that bye week, they're playing another home game. You heard what I said earlier in this video. I feel that the best team in football, the team with the highest upside, after looking at Jake Moody's kicking performance this last weekend, perhaps I can't call them the best team. But the team with the highest upside are Nick Bosa's 49ers. Folks, after Buffalo plays KC and then has a bye week, after, I believe, fans start looking at this Bill team and say, wow, how did they beat KC like that? And after you get the added hype of the Bills being off the week after that, so the Bills can't do anything to unring that bell, the 49ers go to Buffalo. Right? It's Bills against 49ers. Right? Now that game's going to have repercussions because the Niners aren't playing close to their capability. Right? The Niners have been sputtering. Right, folks? The best performance in their game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, believe it or not, was Baker Mayfield. Right? I mean, time and time again, the Niners came in, had hands on Mayfield, and Mayfield continued to complete passes. And yes, Chris Godwin and Mike Evans were both out of the game. Right? Mayfield was an absolute magician against this Niner team. Right? It was astonishing. Well, the Niners found a way to win the game. That's what great teams do. Right? They found a way to win the game. Let's just say the Niners need wins. You saw Arizona beat the Jets yesterday. I believe you're going to see the Rams in the Niners division beat Miami later today. Right? The Niners are dealing with a feisty division. They need wins. They can't continue to sputter. McCaffrey's back. Right? McCaffrey, the numbers don't fully reflect the burst that he showed on the field. McCaffrey looks like he's 100%. Right? They have a guy, Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver. That's a name people are going to start to know. The number 1 receiver, Brandon Ayuk is out for the year. Folks, Pearsall was the guy who got stabbed, who was out for a while. He's in the lineup, and he looks like a baller. What I want people to do is to look closely at Brock Purdy's numbers. Right, folks? Brock Purdy is arguably playing the best football of his career right now. Right, so let's just say the Bills will get tested this coming week, at least that's how it seems, by the last unbeaten team in the league, the defending champion Kansas City Chiefs. Then they have a bye week. Then they play the Niners, coming off the bye. And the Niners are not playing peak football. Right? Just understand, by the end of that sequence, we might be talking about the Bills as the best in the AFC. Let me continue here. Certainly they're worth your attention for futures. Right? Understand, they're about to play KC and the Niners. They're competitive in both games. Let's talk Detroit. They're real. Right? I know they're coming off a 5-interception performance by Jared Goff, but they're real. This is a team you need to back with futures. These are not your father's Lions. Now, just understand, Detroit right now has the best record in the NFC. And believe it or not, with the best record in the NFC, they have an easy run of games their next 3 weeks. They play Jacksonville at home. They play Indy in Indy. They play the Bears at home. Folks, there's a possibility that they can have 11 wins at the end of those 3 games. Right? I mean, the bottom line is it's Trevor Lawrence, who hasn't lived up to billing, let's be blunt. It's Joe Flacco, who I consider a sleeper at quarterback, but let's just say it's Joe Flacco against the best team in the NFC, stat-wise. Then, of course, you have a rookie who looked terrible yesterday, by the way, against New England. Caleb Williams, right? The Bears, who have a tough schedule, by the time they get to 3 weeks from now, any illusion they have of a postseason might be gone. The team might be struggling. Let me also point out, too, that Detroit is better than it seems. Not only do they already have 8 wins, but they're in an extremely tough division. Look at the records of the Vikings and the Green Bay Packers. Believe it or not, they've already beaten those key divisional foes in their own backyards. Detroit went to Green Bay and beat Green Bay. Detroit went to Minnesota and beat Minnesota. They've already done the heavy lifting. Right? So, let me just say this. If you're a futures bettor, you need to have futures on the Lions. You need to recognize that although they just squeaked by, and I mean just squeaked by, the Houston Texans, and even though they've been in the news for the Hutchinson injury, which is devastating. He's an impact player. He's one of their best players. He's out for the year. While all of that is true, they're just too well positioned for a futures bettor to ignore them. Let me talk about yesterday's game. It's troubling. It's troubling. Right? The Lions needed 19 unanswered points in the second half to win the game by 3. Let me also point out, too, that for those of us who remember last year's playoff game involving the Texans, right, the team the Lions beat yesterday, and the Baltimore Ravens, you might remember C.J. Stroud in that game, fading big time in the second half. If you're a Texan fan, you need to ask a deeply troubling question. Is there a blueprint that elite teams can use to shut down Stroud? Right? In this game, Houston scores no points in the second half. Right? I mean, understand there's information no one's going to publish. If you're a defensive coordinator and you're looking at film and you see certain things and you think to yourself, okay, if I ever face this quarterback in a conference championship game or a Super Bowl, I know the strategy I'm going to use. Right? That defensive coordinator doesn't have an incentive to publish it to the public because it's a trade secret. It's a hidden advantage. Do teams have a hidden advantage on C.J. Stroud? Now let's ask a more troubling question. I think the Lions are legit. Right? Goff, of course, Pac-12, you know my belief. The old Pac-12, which is no longer with us, produced the best quarterbacks. Right? I could go down the list. I want you to just think about the quarterbacks in the National Football League from the Pac-12, right? Even some recent guys who are no longer in the league, like Andrew Luck. Will understand Goff, first pick in the draft out of Berkeley, right? The first. Highly thought of player. But on February the 3rd, 2019, he got into a Super Bowl with the Rams and a quarterback guru, Sean McVay, head coach, right? The Swangali who has rejuvenated Matthew Stafford's career, right? And of course, they were playing Bill Belichick, who, believe it or not, according to folklore, was telling people before that Super Bowl that he had the answers on how to win the game, right? Belichick, of course, is a defensive guy. He thought he could beat Jared Goff. Now, in that Super Bowl, you should know that the Rams did not score a touchdown. Goff was shut down. Goff had a 50% completion percentage. Goff had a 57.9 quarterback rating. The Rams were held to 3 points, none in the first half. Right? Understand, the Rams, a team that looked like they had it all. They were young at the time. Here they had a guy who was the first pick of the draft who got them to the Super Bowl. The Rams felt that they had to retool. Goff was eventually traded. If you're a gambler, you have to ask yourself why. Right? Goff doesn't look like the kind of guy who's staying out late at night, who's nodding off in team meetings, who's smoking cigarettes in the locker room. He doesn't look like that guy. He's always come across as studious. He's always come across as a guy who supports the team. So why would the Rams, with a young quarterback who they themselves picked first in the draft, right? Why would the Rams move off Goff? You have a whole group of gamblers out there who are looking at the splits on Goff, right? There's the feeling that there's some part of Goff's game that doesn't translate to bad weather outdoors, right? You need to just think about these things. So, yesterday, Goff throws 5 picks. Whenever a quarterback throws that many, red flags should be going off, especially if the hallmark of his Detroit Lion team is offense. Right? Let me say this politely too about Lamar Jackson. There's a big difference, and I mean a big difference, between seeing a guy in the middle of the season where you're kind of in a flow and then suddenly you're up against a team and the guy's a bit different, right? The guy has a great eye in terms of finding the open receiver, Your players might not have the intensity that they would have if it were a conference championship or a Super Bowl, right? There's some quarterbacks who can beat you in the middle of the season, who might not be able to beat you deep in the postseason, right? One of the knocks on Lamar Jackson, future Hall of Famer, two-time league MVP, spectacular winning percentage. One of the knocks on him is that he's not great in the postseason, right? I heard Colin Cowherd, and Cowherd's great. Cowherd is great. But I heard Colin Cowherd say that Dan Marino didn't win a Super Bowl. And that why are we so hard on Lamar Jackson not winning a Super Bowl when we consider Marino to be one of the best quarterbacks in history, right? You know, I'm a child of the 1980s. Marino made a Super Bowl. Lamar Jackson hasn't, right? Go back and look at Marino. I believe it's his second year, right? I believe that Super Bowl was played at Stanford Stadium in California. It's pertinent because the team Marino was playing really had a home game. They were the San Francisco 49ers. You remember them, right? Montana, etc. Bill Walsh, middle of the 1980s. A team that Al Michaels calls the Roman Empire, right? Folks, the Niners were a juggernaut. You might also remember in the 1980s, there was the NFC and then there was the other conference. You knew in Super Bowls it was about the NFC, didn't you? Right? This was back in the era where you would see John Elway occasionally in Super Bowls. He wasn't winning them. You knew he wasn't winning them. Right? This was right around the era where Joe Gibbs didn't even need the same quarterback. He could go to different Super Bowls with different quarterbacks, and the NFC was still beating the AFC. So understand, early in his career, Dan Marino, who of course threw for 5,000 yards, who was doing things statistically no one had done, Dan Marino made the Super Bowl. Lamar Jackson hasn't proven to us that he can. Jared Goff hasn't proven to us that in a Super Bowl he can get more than 3 points. Right? Just understand, I have money on the Lions. I believe they're real. I also understand that sometimes there are questions that you really do have to think about. The fact that C.J. Stroud shut out second half against the Ravens last year in the playoffs, shut out against Detroit. Detroit wanted this game, right? They're getting beaten up at halftime. They come out. You know, the key is we're just fans. You and I know defensive coordinators are going to be looking at this film of the second half in preparing for C.J. Stroud. Houston's offense, of course, anemic. Nico Collins' injury is having far more impact than it should. Contrast C.J. Stroud's performance post-Nico Collins to Brock Purdy's performance post-Ayuk. Right? Well, let's just say the Lions are perfectly situated. There's another point I want to make. And that point concerns a team that I believe is a sleeper. You make a lot of money off sleepers. Here's the problem. The next 4 weeks, we're talking about the Los Angeles Chargers. Folks, this team's defense is Super Bowl worthy. Keep an eye on this team. People are overlooking it because they're looking at Jim Harbaugh. They're saying, wow, it's his first year with the team. Clearly there's going to be some growing pains. And of course, they're hidden by the fact that they're in a division with the 2-time defending champs who just happen to be the last unbeaten team in the league. Right? The Chiefs have a stranglehold on that division, don't they? Right? So, the Chargers, people are overlooking them. Right? Justin Herbert, people are tired of hearing how good he is when his offense isn't high powered. Their last 3 games have been, let's face it, preseason games, right? Their last 3 games, they had the Saints at home, they had the Browns on the road, they had the Titans at home. Right? There are people out there who believe some football teams can go out and beat these 3 teams back to back to back. Right? The next 4 games that the Chargers have are going to decide a lot. Right? It's my belief that you want to get in early. It's my belief that you want to float a little on futures on this team. Let's talk about the next 4 games. The Bengals, they're playing them in LA. The Ravens, they're playing them in LA. Folks, as great as Joe Burrow is, as great as Lamar Jackson is, as powerful as these offenses are, just understand the strong point of the Charger team is its defense. Right? Buckle up. Let's enjoy the ride. This is going to be football at its best. We'll have the answer to the question of how good is this Charger defense after the next 2 weeks. After they play the Bengals and the Ravens at home, they go on the road. They play Atlanta, a team that looks like it's headed to the playoffs, right, in Atlanta. Then they play, of course, Kansas City in Kansas City. If the Chargers go 3-1 or even 2-2 over the next 4 games, just understand you'll be sitting on a gold mine, because the Chargers are a team you do not want to face in the playoffs. Let me just say, too, you heard me talk about the Pac-12. Here's another Pac-12 guy, right? Justin Herbert. If you followed him in college, you know this is one of the sport's premier gunslingers. Right? Now, just understand he's on his best behavior because he's playing under a Pac-12 coach. Right? That's who Jim Harbaugh is. Right? Who likes to run the football. Right? Harbaugh, let's just say he could have had Joe Namath in the late 60s. He could have had Dan Fouts. He would want the quarterback handing off the football. That's just who he is. So Herbert's on his best behavior. But just understand, if they need a gunslinger, if a shootout starts happening, there are very few in the league. I'm just telling you, very few in the league who can throw the ball with the accuracy and with the judgment that Justin Herbert does. He's the gunslinger who does not throw a lot of picks. Right? This Charger team has more talent than you think. We're going to find out just how much in the next 4 weeks. That's worth looking at. Let me close, too, by saying, you've heard me say it's over for the Jets. Let me name another team that it's over for. And understand, when I say it's over, I mean literally. The team itself is going to give up. And people who need surgeries, and in the NFL, at any given moment in time, that's about a third of the roster. Right? People who need surgeries are going to say, you know what, I'm going to get the shoulder looked at. You know what, this sore knee I have, I'm going to get that looked at. Right? People who the doctor is telling them, hey, you need to slow it down, we need to limit your minutes, they're going to take time off to recuperate. And that's the Dallas Cowboys. Folks, Dallas right now is dead man walking. Mike McCarthy knows he's not going to get a new deal at the end of the year. I noticed Bill Belichick has badmouthed the Jet treatment of Robert Saleh. He said next to nothing about the Dallas Cowboys. I think he might be interested, right? Understand his mentor, Bill Parcells, used to be head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, and I'm sure Bill and Bill talk and compare notes from time to time, right? I think all of these reports about the guys not being the best of friends, that's not something I buy, right? You can have a buddy who the relationship gets strained at times when he calls you with a real call. When you pick up the phone and your buddy says, hey, should I interview for this job? What kind of guy is Jerry Jones really? What's it really like to be head coach of the Dallas Cowboys? Even though the guy may have insulted you at last year's Christmas party or when you were having drinks together with the rest of your crew, you're going to keep it real with him, aren't you? Right? I think the Cowboys have cashed it in. I think they understand that they don't have the running game to compete. I think Dak is banged up. I think the team understands that they need to regroup. I think even Mike McCarthy understands, our defense is terrible this year. We don't have the defense, right? Part of that is because of injuries. Micah Parsons was missing for several games. But the bottom line is it's not happening in Dallas. I don't even think Dallas is going to stay long enough in the building to be a sleeper. Right? So it's over for the Jets. It's over for Dallas. I'm surprised. I thought both teams would do a lot better this year. But reality is reality. And we have to accept it, regardless of the talent on the roster. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. I'll be on here with picks tomorrow after the Monday night games, and we'll talk more about all of this. Thanks for stopping by.